Hello again, you're watching the Richard and Judy Book Club exclusively with WHSmith, and this week's book is called Dark Winter, and it's by David Mark, who is a crime journalist, which is appropriate because it's a criminal fiction. Imagine, if you will, a brilliantly written, cracking story about a serial killer set in Los Angeles. Take it across the Atlantic back here, put it in Britain, move it up north, and locate it in Hull. That's the kind of feel you get from this novel, because it is set in Hull, but it does read, I have to say, David, like an American piece of crime fiction, a classic piece of fiction, and yet you put it in Hull, which is a masterstroke, and very, very risky. I mean, did you have any trouble persuading publishers to go with this idea?
I've had endless trouble. Just don't get me started. No, I had what my children refer to as my decade of misery, trying to get any publisher to see the point in it. Hector started as a minor character in another book.
He's the detective, by the way.
Yes.
We'll come to
yeah. But everything that I've written that I've tried to get published was set in Hull.
Did they say to you, well, we'd love it, but put it in London or put it in New York or...
There was a couple of suggestions early on, not with this particular book, but with other things I've written in the past that said maybe the setting was perhaps part of the problem. But looking back, that wasn't a problem. It was just they were just bad books, really. And now people have warmed to the idea of Hull as a setting. Yeah. It's now become one of the book's assets, really. People seem to like it.
I think it really works. It really does.
And neither of us were sure, actually, to begin with. You know, when we were looking to select this current spring list, I thought, it's set in Hull. Is that too big a leap? But actually, you're quite right. It's part of the personality of the book, and it works beautifully. It really does.
Well, Hull doesn't deserve to be the punchline that it is.
No.
You know, people do think of Hull, and they just think of some crummy northern fishing town, and it's the people who say that have never been.
No.
They don't have any point of reference other than one Christmas episode of Only Fools and Horses. That's really all that they have, and quite a lot's changed since then.
And it's got some beautiful old architecture.
Oh, it's visually stunning, but it also does have this air about it, which is so incredibly cinematic, and it's a wonderfully filmic kind of city. Everything that you can imagine a setting. It's somewhere within the whole city boundary.
Well, let's talk about the storyline. Let's talk about the plot. There's a serial killer on the loose. Just explain to us how the killings relate to the past.
Well, essentially, the central character is a Scottish chap by the name of Hector McAvoy, and he's something of an outsider on this serious and organised crime unit that's been set up. The first crime is a murder at sea. There's an old fisherman was out making a documentary 40 years on from the sinking of a trawler. And he's killed. Shortly after that, a young girl is hacked to bits in a Hull church.
In church, yeah. It's a horrific murder.
That was quite hard to write, to be honest, but it needed to be done.
And she was a survivor too.
Exactly, and that is short.
So hang on. So the old fisherman was a survivor of a fishing accident 40 years before. Yeah. What did the girl survive?
She survived a massacre in Sierra Leone, where she was originally from. And
in subsequent killings, there always seems to be this link that the victims in Hull are survivors of previous disasters.
They were the people who walked away. They were the ones who, you could say, cheated fate. They were the sole survivors.
And McAvoy's the only person he's the first person to see this. He makes the connections, isn't he?
He's not the kind of detective who works solely on instincts at all. I think there's an awful lot of very good staffers who do that already in the crime fiction world. He just happens to strike lucky a couple of times and puts it together.
But we love
he's a lovely man. Yeah. And I think one of the questions I sort of drafted for you at the back of the book was something like, he's quite unusual for a detective, a crime fiction detective, in that he doesn't have any great dark secrets, and he doesn't have any...
He's not drunk.
He's not drunk, and he's got a really happy family life, and he is genuinely, he's very, very big, he's very tall, he's very strong, but he genuinely is a really nice guy. And you said I thought when I read the answer to what I'd asked you, you sort of said, slightly crossly, well, I mean, they may be men like him may be unusual in crime fiction, but they're not in the real police world.
Which you know, because you're a crime reporter.
Well, that's very much the case. I mean, you get a few rotten apples, but the majority of detectives I've seen up close a big, impressive, formidable, caring people.
As a former news reporter, I totally agree with you. You're right, there is the odd one, but the fictionalised version of them it's become a cliche, and it's not true.
Absolutely, and I think it's a bit unfair on the people who originally wrote that kind of detective. They've now been mimicked to death.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think there was part of it I wanted to write an antidote to that, but I think because of my crime journalism background, I thought I could bring some real authenticity to it as well. So I wanted to create a hero, but one who wouldn't seem out of place in reality. I think I get a little bit annoyed with reading serial killer stories where they seem to have come up with the motif first. They seem to have thought of a grisly death and then worked a plot around that, whereas I prefer to actually put human beings in it, and occasionally there's a reason why somebody would do something that's a little bit unorthodox. But I think the humanity has to be the first thing that you write.
Have you always been a crime journalist? Is that are you really drawn to that?
I've always been a journalist. I got my first job in journalism when I was just turned 17, and I just somehow gravitated towards crime.
Right.
I think it might be.
Well, it's the sexy newsbeat, isn't it? Crime?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I find politics deeply tedious. At 17, you're in no position to write about health or education because you don't know anything. But crime, that's something that, if you know what's right and you know what's wrong. And I was quite good at getting people to like me.
What was your first newspaper?
That was the News and Star in Carlisle.
I remember the News and Star. And now you're with the Yorkshire Post?
No, I've long since left the Yorkshire Post.
Oh, okay.
I was at the Press Association most recently, but I'm now...
Full-time?
Now write books for a living.
I don't want to give too much away, obviously, but it's not giving too much away to say that the villain of the piece, the killer, is fundamentally playing God.
Absolutely, but they do have their own reasons for that. It would be nice to write a straightforward psychopath who just does that because it's a nice motif in a novel. But no, when I crafted that particular psychopath, again, I had a thread of thought going into it as to what could have made them this way, and hopefully by the end you don't see things from their perspective, but they're not a completely
it's
evil
comprehensible
person.
No, there's a logic to it.
It works really well, and I think, for example, if you think about sort of what is terribly fashionable at the moment, which is Scandinavian crime fiction, this is actually very, very centred on the warmth of Hector, I think, which actually works incredibly well for me. And it's a great relief not to have, as we said, a sort of very flawed central character who is basically is kind of and basically almost as flawed as the kind of psychopath that they're actually looking for, they're hunting for. You say you've written several books before, but then this is the first time you've actually got it published.
Yeah.
Do you feel now much more confident?
I'm delighted looking back that I didn't get published until now. But that's only with hindsight. It was agony for all those years that I couldn't. But no, it was for a reason. If any of those books that I'd written, which some of them were okay, had got published, that would have been great at the time. But I think I had to reach a certain place and a certain age and have a certain level of experience before I could craft something that's. And will
you stay with him, with McAvoy?
Absolutely, yeah. I've got a whole
casebook.
Oh, I've got the next 10 novels already in my head, and I cross the road extra carefully in case those are lost. I know exactly what will happen to Hector and the people around him.
Well, that's good to hear, because he's a great character, and as we said, it just works beautifully in Hull. You were so right to stick to your guns, and look at you now. I mean, you're on a list like this because of merit. It's just such a good piece of writing.
I haven't quite got used to it. Yeah.
Well, you should. Probably welcome back in a couple of years. So, Dark Winter by David Mark. Terrific serial killer stuff. If you get it from WHSmith, it's kind of worth doing that, because it's only in there that at the back of the book sold in that store, you've got the extra content, how to download the podcasts, the question and answer session that Judy mentioned that we do with all the authors, lots of stuff like that, but only if you buy the book at WHSmith. Congratulations. Really good start. And you'll enjoy it.